Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Alyssa Muscatine, and we have a especially timely program for you this evening, featuring former Republican political operative Tim Miller, here to talk about his new book, Why We Did It, a travelogue from the Republican Road to Hell. Few brief housekeeping notes. First, though, masks are currently required in the store, except for those of us up here speaking, so please keep yours on during the event. When we get to the Q&A portion this evening, if you have a question, please come up to the microphone right here on the other side of this pillar. And at the end of the event, our staff would really appreciate it if you'd help them by folding up the chairs that you're sitting in and leaning them against a pillar or a shelf. Now, a few words about Tim. He worked in Republican politics over 2 decades, starting as an intern in the late 1990s, and later through stints as an Iowa staffer for John McCain in the 2008 presidential primary, a spokesman for the Republican National Committee during Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign, and communications director for Jeb Bush's 2016 presidential campaign. Along the way, Tim developed a reputation for being pretty skilled at oppo, or opposition research, meaning the spreading of damaging stories about political opponents. And to this end, in 2013, he co-founded an organization that came to be known as America Rising. He has since left the GOP and pursued a career in media, becoming a writer for the Bulwark News and Opinion website, a host of Not My Party on Snapchat, and commentator on MSNBC. He's also known, of course, as a very vocal critic of Donald Trump. But having been immersed in Republican politics for as long as he was, Tim knows quite a few of those in the GOP who have stayed and gone along with Trump while watching much of what they had once believed in degraded and devalued. In Why We Did It, Tim examines what makes some people abandon their principles to align with power. And he doesn't spare himself either, exploring why he got caught up in the political game and compromised his own beliefs, for instance, as a gay man, making allowances for Republican opposition to gay marriage. Tim's a talented storyteller with a very breezy and engaging writing style. Publishers Weekly called his book an anguished yet entertaining expose. And particularly today, when we watched Cassidy Hutchinson testify bravely and compellingly before the January 6th committee about the corrupt, abusive goings-on in Trump's White House, Tim's probing look at his own past mental contortions and the strained self-justifications of his former friends and colleagues resonates all the more. In conversation with Tim will be Olivia Nuzzi, Washington Correspondent for New York Magazine, where she's been for 5 years. Olivia is singled out in Tim's acknowledgments as the only person whose work was quoted twice in the book. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tim Miller and Olivia Nuzzi.
Hey, everybody.
Hi. Hi, thank you.
It's crazy, isn't it? I've been in those chairs a lot of times. It's kind of weird.
You came here a lot in college.
Yeah, I was a dork at George Washington University, so I was here, watching everybody come through. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, and thank you for doing this. I want to start by talking about Cassidy Hutchinson. What did you make of today's testimony? Did you relate at all to what seemed to be her experience up there?
I thought Cassidy was unbelievable today, and I was obviously proud of her. On the one hand, it was very relevant, of course, to the themes in the book. A lot of people that I interviewed, all my old friends and colleagues who decided to not do the kind of testimony that Cassidy did today. And to me, frankly, I think the most striking thing in thinking about this in the context of what I've been working on for the last year is all of these grown men and women, all these grown-ups with important jobs that were supposed to be in service to the public, who have kids that they're supposed to be setting an example for, you know, who got into this business, I assume, most of them because they wanted to make a difference, just sitting on the sidelines, angling for their next job, and leaving a 26-year-old woman to hang out to dry in front of the whole country. I couldn't help thinking about their failures, and I just think that makes what she did so much all the more powerful. And I think that you know, I learned a lot, I think, in doing these interviews and writing this book about why she did it.
Yeah, we were talking about this backstage, but there was a moment in her testimony today, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, where she said something to the effect of, she felt one way as someone who worked for the White House and on behalf of the administration, and then she felt a different way, and horrified, I believe was the word, as an American, and it made me think about the kind of the cognitive dissonance that you write quite a lot about in the book. I mean, the book is about this.
Yeah.
That the people who are careerists in Washington, who are bus drivers, often have to justify what they're doing on a daily basis when they actually personally don't agree. And you write a lot about this in respect to being closeted and being gay and working on behalf of a Republican Party that did not welcome you.
Yeah, a lot there. Well, first just on Cassidy, because I think that the most striking thing about that kind of bifurcation in her head and this compartmentalization that she was doing, which I write a lot about, is that frankly, it's kind of refreshing that she was able to see the two elements of her job, right? Like, you work in the White House, so sure, you have an obligation to your boss, the president, but a White House job is different than, you know, working for Elon Musk, right? Like, where your only job is to the company, right? At the White House, you were put...
Don't tempt him to run.
No, sorry. Yeah, I'm not going to attack him. We're not going to have a White House Correspondents dinner moment. We made him into running. But you have this obligation, right? You get into politics. And when I kind of look back in the first half of this book, or a third of the book, it's just sort of me reflecting back. One of my biggest regrets is just how that gets lost so much when you're in the middle of this political game, right? And you know, the horse race is what matters, beating the other side is what matters. You talked about my opera research career and like dropping fun hits on opponents. And there's the notion that, actually, wait a minute, you know, what impact this has on real people is the whole point of what we're doing, right? Like, that's what people say, I served for Donald Trump, right? Because it's public service, you're serving other people. And for so many people in the Washington culture right now, and I think this is always it to a certain degree, but it's really on steroids now, that doesn't even get across people's minds, right? They're like, all I care about is the political short-term ramifications, not what my responsibilities are. And so I thought she did that clearly. And so I reflect on the gay stuff. We talk about that, the gays, because I just thought that was the most striking example about looking at myself, right? And I felt like if I was going to turn the camera, the pen, or whatever on other people to try to judge, you know, why they did what they did, I felt like the best way to understand how they rationalize working for somebody they knew was bad, and that's what I'm talking about in here. There are a handful of people still in Washington that really love Donald Trump, right? And I'm really focused on people who see him as a flawed, cruel person, but have tried to help him anyway. And so I looked back at myself and I was like, well, I worked for a number of people that opposed gay marriage. I tell one story, but I consulted for Ken Cuccinelli, for Christ's sakes, who was like a homophobic bigot, not just kind of a soft anti-gay marriage person.
There's this one scene in the book where you talk about volunteering to call, was it Ralph Reed?
Yeah, Ralph Reed.
And volunteering to say that you would not be turning your candidate at the time gay, essentially.
Yeah.
They would be turning Jeff gay.
Yeah, we aren't going to do
that. But and you say that when you hung up the phone, you couldn't, I believe you said you couldn't look your then partner in the eye.
Yeah, you see her, I can't look her in the eye right now. We were together in the car. And, well, yeah, so what had happened here, and this is relevant, is I took the job to be Jeff's communications director. The bad, you know, conservative media forces that, by the way, were half the times my friends that I was working with, which is another thing I talk about in the book, they went after me. Went back and looked at some old posts I made that was, talking about gay pride parades and making fun of homophobes and stuff like that. And, they published it as like, Jeb Bush is going to be pushing the big gay agenda with Tim Miller as communications director, and then Jeb starts getting all these calls from the Christian conservative types, and I'd only met him one time when this happened. Like, I just got hired, it was the first day, and so we had this very awkward conversation, and it was one of those where I was like, Jeb, I'm going to do it, and it takes to help you win. And he said, I get it. And you know that I don't. And I just interrupted him. I was like, I know, we're good. And he said, all I need for you is to do one thing. I was like, okay, what is it? He goes, call Ralph Reed. Okay, I'll call Ralph Reed. So, anyway, point being, like, looking back on that, it's like, if the most important things in my life are in the back there, my husband and my child, and I was willing to work for people that wanted to bind into law and deny me that, now all of a sudden, I don't know if empathy is the right word, but understanding of the Trump people's mental jiu-jitsu, you start to get it a little more. It's like, if I could compartmentalize that and say, oh, well, I want to do what's for the good of the team or for the good of my job, even though this affects me personally. Imagine how easy it is to be like, well, I'm going to do what's good for my career. I don't know any people on the border. Trump's mean tweets. Who are they going to hurt? These hypothetical things. It becomes much easier for them to rationalize it.
I'm curious. This book involves like incredibly well-rendered portraiture of a lot of.
Thank you. You do a lot of incredibly well-rendered portraitures yourself, so it's high praise.
But some fascinating people, or people who were important or have been important in this modern era of American politics, and you come at it from this uniquely knowledgeable vantage point. I think you really have people's number in a way that I think a lot of journalists coming at these same characters who don't have your background or don't have your experiences, they don't have that same understanding of psychologically what drives people to do this. But I'm curious if it doesn't read like a confession, but I'm curious if it felt that way when you were writing it. Because you cop to quite a lot of behavior that if someone like tweeted it today, it might seem like they're doing Oppo on you.
Yeah, pretty bad. Yeah, I grew up Catholic, so there's a confessional element to it, for sure.
That's evident,
I've been in a few confessionals in my day. For sure, yeah. I felt like if I was going to try to do portraits of these other people, I had to do myself first. I had to, both for credibility with the reader, but also for my own sake, to help me to make sure I understood the mental jiu-jitsu they were going through. And so, I think that's what I wanted to bring to the book, is there have been so many Trump books. I'm sure you all have read a bunch of them, right? And so many people have written about Sean Spicer and Alt Bannon and all these people, Lori Lewandowski. But reporters, partly because of the nature of their job, right, it doesn't really do you get away with this. But most people, it doesn't do them much good to like speculate about the psychology, to like put people on the couch. That usually isn't like typical political journalism. And so what I want to do is not compete with those people about, oh, here's this revelation of what happened behind the scenes. There are a couple of little funny ones, but instead to really try to get at why, what motivated them, what is the reason why they did it, in the hopes A, that we better understand them. I think that's an end into itself. B, maybe that makes people reflect on their own, moral choices at times and the stories they tell themselves to justify the things they do, and lastly, hopefully, a couple of them, it'll make them think about it going forward, and we can have hopefully a few more people like Cassidy.
Did your understanding of yourself and your own history sharpen throughout the process of reporting and writing this, and did your understanding of the people who you profile change?
That's a good question. Some of the people had changed. Alyssa Farah, right, who I write about. She's the only character who I didn't know, I guess. I went in with a pretty well-defined view of why my old bosses and Sean Spicer and Rhines and Elise and why these people did what they did. Elise, I think I grew a little bit more of a nuanced, kind of actually less sympathetic as time went on view of her, if that was possible. Alyssa, on the other hand, was the one person in the book who was a main character who I didn't know beforehand, and I felt like it was important to write about her because she was the one example until Cassidy today, really, of a person who went into the Trump administration, and I actually don't know about what Cassidy's background is, so Alyssa might be the only example of this. Went into the Trump administration knowing he was bad, but justified it for various reasons, and then after the election during the Stop the Steal said, no, this is going too far for me, and left, and then stuck with leaving. Right, so, you know, you might want to give Bill Barr or somebody maybe a half of a card there, but as long as you're going to vote for him again next time, I don't count you, right? So Alyssa is the only one that kind of made that dramatic of a change, and I just have to admit, going in, part of me was cynical, and thought, it's a ploy. She wants the View seat, you know, she wants whatever, or maybe she goes back to the Barr, you know, camp of you know, or Lindsey Graham, or we could list all the others who kind of said the right things for a week and then have gone back on it. And honestly, she really was not that. And she's extremely raw. We spent a ton of time together, and also Lebanese, we were Lebanese connections. Maybe there's something there. But I just, you know, I ended up in the end not feeling like her justification for herself was really defensible. Like, I fundamentally disagreed with her justification, but I came to believe that that she believed that it was defensible and that it was a good faith decision. Just ended up not being the right one. To stick around, that is, like, to stick around as long as she did.
You mean to stick around after Election Day? And
No, up to it, right? Like, my point is, you know, she had the job for Pence, and then took the promotion to be his White House communications director, and knew at the time, you know, said she has a panic attack. So she has a panic attack while trying to decide whether or not to do it. Like, she's on a hike with her husband.
Probably not a good sign.
Yeah, probably not a good sign. I was like, why did you do this? I was like, this is your body screaming at you to not take this job. And but she decided again, and we went back and forth on this for hours, like arguing about it. But she decided in the end that it was better to have a good person in that job than she knew who the alternates were. She was like, they were not good people, and that you know, she had experiences where she helped nudge Trump the right direction one time or another. You know, she's like, I saved Stars and Stripes, and he was gonna fire Esper, and he was gonna do the Insurrection Act, and she's like halfway through this list, this is an insane person. I was like, why weren't you on TV saying, like, the president is a madman, like, we need to get him out of the office immediately? And she's like, well, because then I wouldn't have been able to nudge him. And so, you know, I think in the end, I don't know, I wish she was here, I don't know what she would think. I think she's a little torn. Yeah, I think she's a little torn. Yeah, I think she's a little torn about, you know, whether that was the right thing. But I think of all the people that I you know, profiled, I thought her justification, the rationalization for what she did, was the most defensible. Just in the end, I disagreed.
In some way, when I was getting through all the different characters, it occurred to me that it sure seemed like, at the time, and even looking back, that the majority of people working there in the Trump administration actually fell into this camp of the people who claimed, who had some, you know, some traditional political background maybe, or who didn't, and decided that he's crazy, but it's worth it for me to be here, or who would privately defend it in similar ways to how Farah does in the book. And the real outliers are the true believers. Yeah. And they were kind of regarded as like, what's wrong with that person?
Seem crazy.
And yeah, internally. And yet, would the place have functioned without people like that, who are quote unquote sane and are there for kind of typical careerist striver reasons?
Yeah, that's the fundamental point that I was trying to make. Is
it's like, are those people better though than like?
No, they're worse. They're worse. You know, they're worse actually. And it was the Team Crazy was dragging the quote unquote normal people around, right? There were times where they nudged Trump back, but it was Trump that was corrupting them. Like, they weren't making Trump better. I heard about that famous committee to save America. that came out in the first year, and they said, we judge ourselves based on bad outcomes prevented, not good things achieved. It's like, no shit. Like you guys didn't do anything. It's like John Kelly was like running the Department of Homeland Security when we were detaining people with green cards in airport cells. I was like, you didn't prevent any,
And as you noted, none of those people on that committee voted
for Joe Biden, the only person that could actually save America from Donald Trump. And so, I think that those people are worse, and for sure. And they're I don't know if the book has villains because I'm trying to create complicated. I'm trying to make three-dimensional characters. But those are the folks that I come down the most harshly on.
It comes across in a very nuanced way that they're villains.
Nuanced villains in the book, and I forget where I was going with that.
The book's going great. I'm curious how you think about how naive you were earlier in your career. Now, I mean, obviously, right, a bit about this, but why do you think you were able to maintain the cognitive dissonance for so long?
Naive is also, Leslie keeps going back to about herself, and she acknowledged that's something that she acknowledged, which surprised me when we were spending time. I think that to a certain extent I was naive, right? And so, I go back. The book starts in 2007 when I'm working for McCain in Iowa, and I interviewed a lot of my old colleagues from that. And I was like, just to make sure my memory is correct. And when McCain would have these town halls in Iowa in early 2007, the questions were just immigration, immigration, immigration. Iowa. It's not a big problem in Iowa. And then he picks Palin, and the Palin rallies were these sort of pre-Trump rallies, right? They're yelling Muslim stuff, yelling racist stuff. I look back on that and think, I knew then. There was like a part of me that knew then that this was on the wrong trajectory. And so, there's a little bit of naivete. Then there's also just the reality that John McCain and Mitt Romney, while flawed humans, are we're very different. Like there were responsible people at the till. And so I think that the justifications in a lot of ways, had a little bit more merit, and that had a little bit, there were elements that supported it, which is, we can say that all of the bad things that came to pass, we could have seen some of that in 2007, that's true. But it's also true that John McCain did an immigration reform bill with Ted Kennedy, believed that climate change was real and said he was going to do cap and trade if he got into the presidency, told his campaign staff that they couldn't do racist attacks on Barack Obama over Jeremiah Wright. So, there was a fundamental different leadership at the top. So I think that knowing that there was something rotten, and also recognizing that it was a different time, I think that those two things can both coexist. But to me, in the end, the book is about, and it's one thing I hit McCain on. I'm very kind of McCain except for on this one thing, which is about these comforting lies. And the book is about how easy it is to tell yourself a story that is convenient, right? That is comforting, and how hard it is when you're faced with a tough situation, and how hard it is to look at yourself and say, no, wait, actually, I need to be responsible for this right now, right? It's easy in 2008 to say, well, Palin's crazy, and John McCain's now pretending that he's for a border wall when he really isn't. But that's okay. That's a convenient thing we needed to do to win, right? And I think that makes sense. That makes sense to people. And over time, those stories that people will start to tell themselves become a lot more strange, right? Than that one did in 2008. But you can see a connection directly from 2008 to what people still say to me now, which is we need to have good people in there. It's what are you talking about? The crazy people have taken over everything. There is no. There is no nudging in the right direction.
Finishing this book today while Cassidy Hutchinson was testifying was interesting because I was thinking there are two great examples of the reality that in the moment maybe it doesn't seem like it matters all that much when you are doing some oppo, you're talking to some reporters to push something, you're doing whatever. minor tasks anybody in a big, bureaucratic campaign or organization has to do. And it doesn't feel probably on an individual level like your actions matter that much, right? Because it's like, well, I'm not, Cassidy Hutchinson isn't gonna, walk Rudy Giuliani to the Oval Office. Some other person's gonna do that, and what's it matter? But it seems like those are the people who, in sum, make up the system that enables someone like Donald Trump, right? And so it just seems like, in some ways, a cautionary tale about that.
Yeah, it totally is. I think the line, I don't remember the exact line, but it's, if we treat politics as just this big game, right, where you're just one little cog and nothing really matters and you're just doing what you can to help your team win the game. Should have been that surprising that a game show host, television show host, would have been better at that than a bunch of nerds in DC? I don't think so. I think that in retrospect, obviously it would have been crazy to predict that Donald Trump was going to be the president, but like this notion that he could abuse a system where all of us at an individual level were saying, well, we can just throw this little piece of red meat to the face. We don't really believe it. Nobody on our staff believes it, but whatever. Okay, we need this that's going to inflame them and make them more mad at our opponent or rile them up more to turn out. But over time, you create a culture where then nothing matters, and this is endemic now in Republican politics. There's a phrase called "LOL, nothing matters," right? It's like nothing matters. We don't have to do anything. And so I look back in 2012, and then just one tiny example of this, but how it grows. I was at the RNC. We send out these mailers. Mostly goes to senior citizens. They're asking people like, give me $5 of your Social Security money. It's how the RNC pays for things. And for some reason, I was given the job of redlining it. And I get this mailer, and it was insane. It's like conspiracy theories and like just really, over-the-top rhetoric. And, so I start marking it up. I'm like, this is crazy. This isn't really true. Let's tone this down. And I send it back up the chain. And the fundraising team gets pissed. And they're like, what are you doing? Like, nobody's ever edited it. The guy that's been doing the direct mail fundraising has been there since Nixon or whatever. And he's like, nobody's ever edited it being like this. And I was like, okay, well, let's ask the chief of staff. The chief of staff's like, well, do you think that any reporters will write anything bad about this thing? And I was like, probably not. I don't know. These are just mailers that go to people's house. And he said, well, okay, I don't see what the problem is then. And I said, okay, then we moved on. And then I stopped redlining them. Now, does that one little incident lead to Donald Trump? No. But there's like a culture where nobody in that meeting says, should we really be like scrounging a couple extra quarters out of our own supporters, with lies and race baiting? No, we shouldn't be doing that. But nobody says that, and that is just endemic throughout the entire campaign culture.
I think those mailers then became the Trump campaign platform.
Yeah, exactly.
You categorize the enablers with a list of titles. Yeah. Do you want to read them? I think it'd be better if you read them.
Okay. We've got the Messiahs. We already did them. The Committee to Save America and the Junior Messiahs, all that stuff. We have the Demonizers. The Demonizers are... I think that there's a gradient of this, Demonizers. I think that there are people that are genuinely principled conservatives, and they look at the left and they think, you are a greater danger to the country than Donald Trump. Now, I think that's ridiculous, but I do think there are people that genuinely feel that way. Some of them based on policy beliefs, others because Fox News has been like warping their brains. But then there's this other group of demonizers that I spend more time focusing on, which is people that, and this is in the political class in DC, people that are doing well with their life, but for whatever reason, they're mad at the Lincoln Project. They're mad at the media for being mean to them. They're mad that their kid has to put their pronouns in their, at school on the paper. And they've decided that like this culture that is against them and that is calling them out for working for Donald Trump is worse than actually working for Donald Trump. I was shocked by how widespread that was. People that, like friends of mine, that were, when I would interview them on background, off the record, nice people, successful people, that worked for moderate Republicans. Then all of a sudden I'd ask a question, and then all of a sudden, I'm not sure you get this. They'd start ranting about this. So anyway, the demonizers became the thing that I realized was much more powerful than I thought. The LOL Nothing Matters Republicans, we talked about them. The tribalist trolls, this is obvious, people who Just think about whatever's good for their tribe is good, whatever's bad for the other tribe is bad. Strivers, this is Elise Stefanik, we come back to them. Her, the Little Mixes, this is a very DC category.
Did you name that for the pop group?
Yeah, the pop group, the Little Mix, yeah, Little Mixes. Not a lot of Little Mix fans out here. That's okay, that's okay, no worries. Google it, Google it. This is the most DC category, which is, I just want to be in the room where it happened. They all made a whole musical about this. I don't really even want power. I just want to be around powerful people so I can talk about that and feel important. That is the drug of Washington, the Little Mixes. This is the Trump category for some staffers, the Peter Principle. People have heard of the Peter Principle. It says you rise to the level of your incompetence. These are the people that disproved that theory. They rose way past the level of their incompetence. But this was a real problem. Trump, because people. So this is the tension between the Alyssa argument and these people, right? Like, because there were so few people that were willing to go in, there were a lot of spots available for people that never would have been within 1,000 feet of the White House.
I'm thinking today, why would Cassidy Hutchinson, I'm sure in a decade would have been qualified to work in the White House maybe if it was a different era and she did it. Anyway, she's fine. But why was this 25-year-old or then 24-year-old, the person with that proximity to what was happening? Why was she the witness around the president and his lawyers, and they're plotting, God knows what? And it's because I think in part there just were not a lot of other people who were willing to be around, and so they got the people that they could get.
Yeah, this was, I talked to Olivia Troy, my friend Olivia Troy, who laughed about this, and she was like, Cassidy had power in this White House. Which is, again, to your point, God love her, respect what she did today. But that's crazy. I mean, this is the person that's like 3 years out of college, right? Like Mark Meadows couldn't find other people. This is why he was begging Alyssa to go back in. The example of the Peter Principle disprover is the one where I stole from you. I decided I didn't need to do my own research on this. That was Stephanie Grisham. Oh. Right? Which is like, and she admits it to her credit. Everybody should read Olivia's article about Stephanie Grisham. Yeah, but you really should. She basically says, I never would have had this. And so I took the job as press secretary. I had an inferiority complex, and I got in bunker mode. There were a lot of people like that, and I think that's important to understand Trump's Washington. Our other favorite DC category is the nerd revengers. This is all of us a little bit in Washington. Everybody here, I think, pretty much. Nobody that goes to DC was cool in high school. Maybe you. There were like 3 cool people. Were you cool in high school? Yeah, there you go. Nobody was cool. And so there is this sort of like lunchroom of life feeling in DC. Yeah, right? Mean Girls thing, right? Where people come here and all of a sudden they're like the big man on campus. People are flirting with them, they're on TV, you've heard about them, they feel important. All their friends that like went to business school have like really terrible jobs. It seems like the ones that were popular in high school, and like they're the ones who have important stories. They were in the room where it happened. So there's some of a level of that that's harmless. But that can also become a pathology, right? Where it's like, I become so embittered at all the people that have been mean to me in life. And like, now this is my moment. And I get to jump on top of the table and say, like, now I am the king, right? And I am the cool person. And I think that there were a lot of people that decided to go in for that reason. They're like, look, now, I mean, this was the Sean Spicer category. Now I get to be the White House press secretary. They called me Sean Sphincter in college. It's kind of mean. I mean, Sean has, like, it did, though. I mean, he got to be on Dancing with the Stars. That's what I'm saying.
Very cool.
That's cool. That's big time. Anyway, you asking yourself, I think that he's happy about that trade. The money, the cartel cashers, is we don't need to spend a lot of time on. Everybody gets that. And then the last ones are the people that I'm the most sympathetic to, and that is people, the inert, and people who are inert, the inertia. They're Republicans. Their whole identity is Republican. I have multiple friends whose kids named Reagan, or dogs or cats are named Reagan. They have Republican tattoos and elephant tchotchkes, and their friends are Republicans. They go to Republican bars. Their job is Republican. And so now I'm supposed to like leave bail on everything? And what am I going to do, Tim? Like, am I going to, I can't move to Oakland like you. I've got college to pay for and all this. I had a level of sympathy for that. I would oftentimes make a few suggestions, like, you could go do corporate PR or something, and kind of mumble, and then we move on. But I get it, though. And then the last one was me, basically, which is the compartmentalizers, which is, and I think that I had a lot of friends who really grappled with this. And these are not people in the White House, but who are around it, who said, Tim, I like the guy I work for, or the woman I work for. I still believe in the Republican principles. I have this career, and so I'm going to compartmentalize this little fact that Donald Trump's crazy in this little box in my brain, in the same way I compartmentalize the fact that, John McCain didn't want to let me get married in my brain, right? And then, every once in a while, Charlottesville would happen, or there'd be a bad news day, and it'd crop out of that little compartment in their brain, and they'd say, I don't know, maybe they'd call some people and say, maybe can I get another dish, I can do something else, and then it dulls, right? And 3 months later, something else happened, right? And I think that there were a lot of people in Washington like that. And anyway, going back to your original question about the White House crowd, when I lost my train of thought, the unfortunate thing about this, and you want to empathize with that choice, is those people were necessary for January 6th for this madness to happen, right? Like, the crazy people were also necessary, and they were the ones that were driving it. But that wasn't sufficient. You couldn't have had a whole White House. You couldn't have had a whole apparatus, right? It had enough people.
They were driving a car that the quote-unquote same people built, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And so, and that is where
Trump grabbing the wheel.
Grabbing the wheel. And so, I think that's where, it was tough for those folks to kind of grapple with that, and they would from time to time, but in the end, just kind of move on. It's like, you're a mid-level manager at BP when the oil spill happens. Like, what am I supposed to do tomorrow, right? Like, what else am I going to do? Like, Donald Trump won. My job, I didn't do the spill.
Do you think that all of this is specific to the Republican Party, or do you see this across the board in professional political circles in Washington?
I hope that there are lessons for this that translate to everything. I don't know. I've had friends who started to read the book who have jobs that they're not sure about. They're like, man, this is making me think about this, right? Like, is this the best use of my short time here on Earth? Like, my skills? So I think it's applicable broadly. Speaking just about the Democrats, I think that there's some differences. The Democratic coalition is different. A big theme of the book we haven't talked about is that it's the mob. It's this crazy mob that's driving the Republicans. Like, the Democratic has some people in their base that have mob mentality. You see some of it online with bullying, etc. But like, the Democratic coalition is different. And you just look at the recent elections, Biden and every primary recently. It's kind of this combination of older black voters and college-educated voters and suburban voters. That there is this bulwark against the crazies to a certain degree within the Democratic Party. Right, that might not last forever, but so I think that's a key difference between the coalitions. That said, I think it's the demonizing section of this, right? So I tried really hard to judge people and to be honest about their decisions, but also to say that it is not healthy for the country for people to believe that their fellow countrymen and everyone and the person sitting next to them is evil. Right? Like, that leads to bad places. And so if you look at Democratic mailers, like I was talking about earlier, Democratic emails, I gotta say, I do cringe sometimes and say, you have to call out Donald Trump for what he is. You have to call out the politicians for you to be honest about them. But inflaming, getting caught up in the gamesmanship of it. You saw this example recently of the Democrats helping Doug Mastriano in that Pennsylvania governor's race. That made me feel icky. I don't know if you guys saw this. He's like a white nationalist, insane person who's the Republican nominee for governor. He was there on January 6th. He's going to be the Republican nominee for governor of Pennsylvania. And the Democrats, because he was going to be easier to beat, did some ads to help boost him. The first order person to blame for Doug Mastriano being the Republican nominee is the Republicans that voted for him. But it's still, you get a little caught up in the clever tactics, I think, when you're doing that. So I think that there's some lessons that are broadly applicable.
You, in Prose profiling yourself and profiling.
Back to me. I thought we were done with me.
You talk about your motivations. You talk about your being closeted and the effect that had, and being able to compartmentalize. Obviously, all of that. I'm curious, when you look at all the other people who you wrote about in this book, what do you think drives that psychologically?
I think it's different for different of them in the categories. I think that Elise, which we haven't talked about yet, is the most pure kind of political animal, and I think that there's this kind of deep desire within her to be successful and to win that I didn't really have. I liked.
Can you explain briefly?
Yeah, sure. So Elise Stefanik was we worked together at the RNC. She runs for office in 2014. I don't know if you guys, many of you probably won't remember this, but her campaign in 2014 was like the dream campaign for me, for somebody like me. She ran as a pro-gay, pro-immigrant, let's deal with climate change, compassionate Republican. Like that was her thing. She was strong on foreign affairs and was like a Paul Ryan acolyte on economics, which I'm less and less liking these days, but it's good enough. But on the big fundamental things that really have turned me off in the party, she was right on every one. She was right, and she ran this campaign, and I had friends that worked for her. One guy says to me, "Tim, this was the moment I had the most pride in politics when she won. I loved that campaign." And that person, 6 years later, that same person got fired by her because he, on a conference call, said that he thinks that she's being too nice to Donald Trump and maybe she should tone it down a little bit. That's sad. I mean, that's harsh. That's sad. And she now has disavowed all that, and the worst part about it is that it's going to work for her. I mean, it's working for her. She's, I think, in the next 5 years, probably going to be either the Speaker of the House or the vice presidential nominee for the party, I think. And so, all she had to do was kind of pretend like she thought Donald Trump was great. And so I think that the motivational element of somebody like that is obviously very different, than some of us who got out.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to wrap up with one more question, which is this very bleak portrait of mankind, at least in politics.
It's not that bleak. I mean, there's some comedy.
Everyone should read it. But it's a kind of cynical look at the people who make up the system and who are driving our politics, at least on the right. So what do you think? Do you have any ideas for what the answer is to fix that? If the problem is people at an individual level behaving selfishly or in a cowardly way?
I guess I just have to. We've had a agreement society here all night. I guess I don't know that it's cynical. I think it's earnest. I try to be as earnest as I could in the book, and it's just unfortunately that my earnest
You're not
has.
cynical. You're painting a portrait.
Yeah,
of
got
people
it.
who are
Oh yeah,
cynical.
they're cynical, right? Yeah. And unfortunately, like my earnestness has led me to where I just don't know any other way to describe it. Look, I do think that maybe this is naive, but I think that leadership and rhetoric matter, right? And I think that it did matter for all the faults of the Palin pick. That John McCain looked at that audience and said, "No, we did not say that about Barack Obama," when the woman said he was a Muslim, and said to his team, "No, we are not going to do ads that Jeremiah Wright." I think that did matter on when he conceded, when he said we are going to congratulate him as all Americans. I think that dropped the temperature, not forever, obviously, for 2 years or whatever, but I think that helped. People are persuadable, and so the only way out of it is for some people to step up and to take responsibility of actually leading in the way that we've had people step up to moments in the past in this country and elsewhere. I don't know. That my other answer to that question was kind of thrown out by the pandemic. When I used to get asked that question on TV or at panels, and I would say, well, I think we just need like this one really cataclysmic thing to happen, right? And then everybody will come together and realize we really need some people in charge who know what they're doing. That didn't turn out to be right. So I'm not pulling for any more cataclysmic things. I don't think that's
your fault.
Yeah, I manifested that.
If you have a question, you can come to the microphone, and if you cannot reach the
Be
microphone
nice.
for any reason, just raise your hand.
I'm fragile.
Hey, thanks so much.
Thank you for
First of all,
coming.
Olivia, your article on Rudy Giuliani is really important right now,
I asked
especially about the drinks at the Market Hotel. One of the best. But Tim, I guess my question is, my biggest takeaway from tonight is trying to reach people that we demonize. So Trump fans, and it's hard when you engage with some people and they talk about QAnon and all this other stuff. But have you had success in moving people away from Trump, and if so, how do you do it? And I guess that's my...
I haven't had a lot of success on that, sadly, but I do a lot. The book, this is a challenge that I have that I need to try to live up to myself. But I have some empathy for the QAnon crowd, right? And people that are genuinely MAGA or genuinely pro-life or genuinely believe that the election was stolen. Like, they're being lied to. Like, they're being lied to. And so, like, the people that I have a problem with in the book are the people that know better, that are creating a permission structure for this, and that are inflaming these folks. And so I think that it's important. It's really easy on social media and stuff to like make fun of, right? And I'm guilty of that at times, no doubt. But that is, I think, the key is to try to speak to these people honestly. And I hope that some of them will eventually see, and I think that Liz Cheney's going to do this in the upcoming hearings. Like the people that got that went to jail because of January 6th. Those people were defrauded. Like their lives have been ruined because Donald Trump is a baby, right? And so I'm hopeful that we can communicate with empathy to those people, and hopefully some of them will see that there are other options out there. And I think that a big part of that, where I do think the Democratic Party falls down on a little bit, is trying to give them answers to the things that they are aggrieved about in their life. And obviously that doesn't, not bigoted things, but economic and other issues.
Great, thanks.
I wish I had a better answer.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Trump's enablers who joined him in his administration wanted an America First policy. They wanted lower taxes for hiring higher earners and for corporations. They wanted to ban abortion. They wanted to promote a stronger link between church and state in this country. They didn't choose Trump to be the standard bearer for those causes, but they signed on because of the causes. Was that so crazy after all?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a great question. And I was talking to a reporter about this earlier today. The Leonard Leos of the world, he's a big pro-life advocate that's been arguing to get Supreme Court justices on. I don't think that it's crazy. I mean, they stole a Supreme Court seat. The Gorsuch, the Merrick Garland seat went up in the exact same way that the Amy Coney Barrett seat did. And so I don't think over the long term that's good for the country and for the Democratic Republic, that there's a big portion of the country that rightly thinks that the seat was stolen from them, because it was. So I don't like a lot of their tactics, but I understand that. The people that are in this book are not true believing pro-life people, true believing, Milton Friedman shrine people, right? Like, I get it. I mean, the people that I'm talking about are the operatives, who, on balance, like lower taxes, and on balance are for abortion restrictions, that are reasonable, but who know that about all the other damage that's being caused by him, and who see it, and that's not their driving motivation. Their driving motivation is winning a game. Like, those are the people that I'm condemning.
Thank you.
This is a bit of a switch, but I wondered if you could reflect on, from kind of a moral point of view, on the limits of opposition research.
Yeah.
Are there things that you really, would not reveal about someone, simply to gain a political advantage?
Yeah. I don't think all opposition research is bad in nature, by nature, right? Sometimes things need to be revealed. Right? Politicians are stealing, are corrupt, are sexually assaulting people. sometimes things need to be revealed, and they aren't going to be unless the opposition is looking into it, right? So I don't think that it's bad by its nature. I think where we went wrong is that we've created this political culture where everything is out. Every day we need to feed the beast, new oppo, new, and a lot of times I was feeding it tongue in cheek. A lot of times it was exaggerated or hyperbole. And I think that we thought that we had control of this, right? Like I had these little bumpers in my head where I was like, if somebody gave me the Hunter Biden laptop or whatever, like we weren't going to do anything with it. It's like the person's kid, like unless there's something on there that demonstrated that the candidate, right? Like we weren't going to smear people's kids. Like we had good lines. People that worked for me at America Rising had lines. Like, there were things that we just said and sat on. But that was so naive. Right? Like once we create this big culture of political media where all you're doing all day is demonizing and smearing other people, well, if we don't do it, then somebody else is just going to do it, right? And so I think this is where, like the culture is something that I want people that are involved in it to reflect on, right? Because even though I don't like really look back on and say, there's this one piece of oppo that I wish I hadn't done, right? It's not that. It's that, what was I doing to contribute to our political discourse by every day, like trying to come up with, something that made the other side look bad? Nothing. I wasn't contributing anything, except for inflaming people. And a lot of the times we were feeding it. I had a profile written about me back in 2013, but I really liked this. They called me puckish. I was like, hey, I'm kind of puckish. That's cool. But I look back on that now and I'm like, oh, that's cringe actually. Like because I was doing it, kind of for kick. I got a kick out of it. People that were reading it didn't get the joke. And so that's I think what I don't like.
Thank you.
Of course.
Hi, Olivia and Tim. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it, and appreciate all the work that you do.
Thank you.
I think probably one reason that a lot of us are here is that we have a lot of respect for the moral courage you demonstrated, Tim, in like breaking away from your injury. And it's respectable because it's so hard to do, and it seems like, I'm ashamed to say I haven't finished the book quite yet, given...
It's out today.
But
work to do today? What are we doing?
So apologies if you address this in the book, but it seems like, respect what you're doing, and I have at the same time a ton of respect for what Liz Cheney is doing today. And obviously you drew the line at different times. But I think one of the lessons I take from that is that it's hard for all of us to draw that line, that there are group and social pressures that influence us beyond what maybe we want to do. And so I'm curious, maybe in your own reflection or in talking to other people, if you have advice for everyone to kind of introspect and think about how we can maybe be more true to our own values.
I really appreciate that question. I'd say two things. One, I say this in the book, politics is a competition still, right? Like there's no path to purity, right? Like you can't just say, I'm never going to do anything that might hurt the other side or whatever. All you can do is be aware. Like is what I'm doing within my integrity, is what I'm doing in service to actually the people that we're all here to what this is all about, like the public. And I think if people start answering those two questions, yes, then we'd be in a lot better place, right? And you could still have a spirited campaign within that construct. The other answer, just about people's personal lives, I don't know. The thing that of all the things that I've done, I think that brings me the most satisfaction is what we did in 2020, Republican voters against Trump. And what we asked people to do was, in their own words, as honest and candid as they could be, just send us a video. Why can we not get there? And you don't even have to be for Joe Biden if you don't want to. You can just say, I can't. This crosses a red line for me because of X. I was a Republican because of Y. And there was a confessional element to that, I think, for people. The therapeutic, there's an AA, watching on people who felt like we're in AA sometimes. But the people that did that, I still have great relationships with some of them. I barely even met them. I just know them from online, but we talk all the time because that was so therapeutic for them. And I think that a lot of times people feel like, well, I shouldn't put myself out there on this because my friends are going to get mad. My experience from RMAT, some people, there were a handful of people that had bad outcomes, but the vast majority, said, Tim, people came out of the woodwork, maybe my father-in-law or something's mad at me now, but whatever. I got more value out of it than anything else. And so I do think that like trying to cultivate honesty when we're talking about politics, social media, and elsewhere, hopefully it's helpful to people. It's been great for me. I'm happier than ever. I don't know. I say in the book, there's a lot of reasons to get mad about the fact that all these people that sacrificed, that went against their integrity and sacrificed nothing, like all got huge paydays. But I'll tell you, I did my interviews with them, and a lot of them are not that happy with their life right now at various levels. Yeah. And I'm pretty happy with my life. So they're miserable on a boat, but they're miserable.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, one more. Time for one more?
Yeah.
One more?
Yeah.
One more. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Big fan here. I usually listen to your podcast twice every week, thanks to my husband.
Thank you.
So, coming from an international perspective, because I'm international, and being a diplomat in DC, it's a little bit crazy to watch January 6th happening in this country. I came to this country 16 years ago from an authoritarian country, so the idea of democracy and the institutions are really, really enshrined, and I really respect that. But to watch this country sort of become a third world country, like the other country, America, is trying to help, like Iraq or wherever democracy building should do. I wonder to what degree you see American citizens take granted for the concept of democracy and the liberty, and slowly, how do I call it, erode the the diligence that they have to apply, the vigilance they have to apply to uphold the system.
Yeah.
It's just from my international perspective, it's really hard to watch and understand. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here and welcome. We have the zeal of the convert from immigrants, which I always love, and like a greater appreciation for America than oftentimes we do. Look, I think that people learned how fragile our democracy is. I hope they did. Not everybody, obviously. Last year, we were extremely alarmed, and I was wrong in this book, but we were really right in 2020 about how alarmed we were about this threat. And a lot of people told me, well, come on, like these guys are just clowns. Like Olivia's writing the story about Rudy, and he's got dye coming down his face. He's an idiot. Like these guys aren't going to take down democracy. They came pretty close. I mean, not that close, but like pretty close. A couple things go a different way. Like imagine if it was only one state instead of 4, right? Like imagine if they only needed to convince the legislature in Arizona and not across 4 states. We would have been in a really tough situation, and obviously it was bad enough as it is. So I think one of the cool things about this is that we are kind of cultivating at a certain level on the center left probably a greater appreciation and recommitment to democracy, and there are a lot of new groups that are starting because of this, and hopefully something good can come out of it in the end. But there's no doubt that we got very laissez-faire about it, and that there was confidence that this isn't this is a problem over there, and hopefully this is what people up to that. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming.
Copies of Tim's book are available for sale at the checkout desk. You'll be up here signing. Please form a line to the right of the table, and please fold up your chairs. Thanks again for coming.